Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Zeeb, and I am the Digital Marketing Specialist at School Health Corporation, and I will be today's webinar moderator. You have joined Part 1 of Evidence-Based Prevention of Infectious Disease, the Fundamentals. Tomorrow, we will be presenting Part 2, which will cover the importance of surface hygiene. We are very fortunate to have Yatao Liu, PhD, and the Senior Manager of Global Medical and Clinical Affairs at Metrics to present for us today. You can see from his biography highlights that he is a true expert in this field, and we are very excited to have him today. But before I hand it off to Yatao, I would like to go over a few things about today's webinar. All attendees are on mute, but we would like you to submit your questions via the questions interface in GoToWebinar. You can type your questions into the box to submit them. You can ask questions anytime during the presentation. Yatao is planning to take about 45 minutes for his presentation, and we will leave time at the end to address your questions. This webinar will be recorded, and a link to it will be posted on the schoolhealth.com website after the webinar, as well as emailed to you for future playback. Everyone who attends today's webinar will also be receiving a certificate of attendance for joining us today. You may be able to submit the certificate to your professional organization for CE credit. You can expect to receive your follow-up email containing the link to the recording and your certificate of attendance in about 5 business days. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Yatao to begin his presentation.
Thanks, Sarah. Hello, everyone. It's my great pleasure, actually, today to share with you about something about microbiology with infections at school settings. So my background is, microbiologist, so this is my favorite topic. And in today's session, I'm going to talk about some overview of infectious disease at schools, and then mainly focus on the fundamentals or principles of infectious disease, mainly 3 aspects: basic and clinical microbiology, microbial pathogenesis, and common pathogens and transmission pathways. And tomorrow, I'm going to actually do 2 case studies, focus on the evidence-based role of surface disinfection for hand hygiene and surface disinfection. So today is about all about fundamentals, tomorrow about case studies. Okay, so let's get an overview of the infectious disease at a school. In the United States, infectious disease accounts for millions of school days lost each year for kindergarten through 12th grade public schools. And about 40% children aged from 5 to 17 years old miss 3 or more school days in the past year because illness or injuries. You can see this, fairly large number. And for cold alone, cause about 22 million school days lost. And for influenza virus, we know that causes flu, and that causes about 30 million school days lost each year. That's, again, fairly significant numbers. What causes infectious disease? So traditional microbiology, actually, if we do the classification, there's 5 categories, which is virus, bacteria, fungi, prions, and parasites. So let's look at this, specifically for virus and bacteria and fungi. Currently, we still classify them as microbes. And prions actually is sort of protein. We know the medical disease, which is caused by the prions, which is a protein. And parasites, traditional microbiology counts this one into the microbes, but nowadays we kind of take the parasites out. But for the school settings, for most infectious disease, they are caused actually by virus, bacteria, or fungi. So today, we mainly will focus on this traditional part, especially for virus and bacteria. When we talk about microbiology, for example, so many bacteria, we can, we always see or listen, hear all kinds of different names. Then the first question for microbiologists is, how does this, bacteria name come from, right? Where did it come from? For example, let's look at a few of them: Klebsiella, pneumonia, E. coli, Salmonella, and the Staphylococcus aureus. All those names, where does it come from? So the name, actually, you can see two words. The first word usually is a genus name, which belongs to which genus, and the second one is a species name. So we have to use these two to actually specify a specific strain of bacteria to differentiate from each other. And for the genus name, Klebsiella, E. coli, Salmonella, they actually, and many more, like Pseudomonas, many, they actually coming from the scientists who discovered this genus bacteria first. As you can see, this is actually to honor the original scientists who can see them. And there's some exception. For example, Staphylococcus. Staphylococcus actually is not a name of a scientist. It's actually rather descriptive. Actually, it's a Greek, means grape, like meaning a bunch of grapes. Because of morphology, if you can see the Staphylococcus under the microscope, you will see kind of like a branch of grapes. And we talk about the genus name. Then the species name. The species name actually mainly linked with a disease. For example, this pneumonia, Klebsiella pneumonia, it can cause pneumonia. So this is linked with a disease. And some other names, for example, Staphylococcus aureus. This aureus actually linked also with, actually it's descriptive, meaning what is the color is, what is the colony. So when we talk about bacteria, actually we should use genus name and species name so we can know which one we're talking about and what kind of disease is caused by the certain bacteria. But we can actually use a genus name standalone version. For example, Staphylococcus on the skin can cause many problems, for example, the skin rash. And for the species name, we cannot use that as a standalone version because without a genus name, that does not actually tell us a lot on that. For example, for the genus, under one genus, there are actually many different species. For example, Staphylococcus, we have Staphylococcus aureus, and also we have Staphylococcus epidermidis. So there's many kinds of species under one genus. And then let's actually put it into a perspective, look at those microbes. You know, we talk about the virus, bacteria, and fungi. Let's just put into a perspective about the size. You know, for the normal human, in general, average height actually is about 1.3 to 2 meters, which translates into about actually 5 feet to 6 feet, and anywhere in between. That's actually the average human height. So, and how about bacteria and the virus, fungi? They actually fall into this category from anywhere from 10 nanometers to about 10 micrometers. And to put into a perspective, let's look at it here. This one, the red, excuse me, the red cell you can see here actually is a red blood cell. Red blood cell, we actually cannot see that by our naked eyes. We have to see that actually under the microscope. And how large is that? It's about anywhere from 2.5 micron to about 10 micron. That's a diameter for a red blood cell. If we put E. coli side by side to a red blood cell, we can say actually E. coli is fairly small. E. coli is about 1 micron. And for the human eyesight, we actually can see about 100 micrometer to 500 micrometers, depends on which age and our eye vision. So with that being said, we are able to see the red blood cell and the bacteria without the help of a microscope. Then if we put a virus side by side with the bacteria, then we can see the virus actually is fairly small, even smaller, right? So this is actually smallpox, and this one actually is HIV. As you can see here, it's fairly small to a bacteria. So of course we cannot see a virus either. And then the recent outbreak and got into the news, we all know that Ebola and measles virus. How large is Ebola? Ebola is about 80 nanometers. So on this picture, you will see that's just a very small dot. We cannot even distinguish that one. And measles virus is about 5 times larger than Ebola. But with that being said, all those bacteria, fungi, or virus we cannot see. We have a saying which goes, eyes never lie. But for those pathogens, we really cannot see them, but they can cause problems. For the school settings, we don't actually have a very, very good data, statistical data to showing which cause more infectious disease, which pathogens cause more infectious disease. However, for the hospital settings, CDC has done a great job. Basically summarize all the data submitted to the CDC and analyze them. So from this one, we can see between 2006 and 2007, among 28,000 hospital-acquired infections reported to CDC, among 621 U.S. hospitals, about 87% infectious disease caused by bacteria and 13 caused by fungi. So this actually gives us a right idea to see what is actually the main culprit causing the infectious disease at a school system would be kind of like somewhere similar. So bacteria would cause actually majority infections. You may wonder, okay, so where's a virus? So for virus, actually, next slide, I will talk about it. The detection for virus is pretty hard. So that's why CDC has no way to tell where the virus causes an infectious disease. But generally speaking, virus actually accounts for the infectious disease about same percentage as fungi. So with that being said, bacteria would be the #1 culprit, followed by virus and fungi. Tomorrow we will actually have some case studies to investigate that. Then for the bacteria, you probably heard, gram-positive bacteria and the gram-negative bacteria. So, what are these? So how we distinguish them? So that's actually a very traditional microbiology way to distinguish bacteria. Actually can be dated to almost 200 years ago. Here you see pictures. The top picture actually is a gram-negative bacteria. The bottom picture is a gram-positive bacteria. And we will talk about the difference of the, the membrane. But for the gram staining, basically is you use actually a dye which is called crystal violet to stain the bacteria, and then you actually use alcohol to do the discoloration. For the crystal violet, it's actually kind of like a navy blue and very purplish color. And after discoloration, still the bacteria will retain the crystal violet, actually make the bacteria become a purplish color. That's why we call this gram-positive bacteria. And for gram-negative bacteria, the crystal violet actually will be washed out by the alcohol. That's why the bacteria actually will present the pinkish color. The two pictures actually taken under the microscope after the gram staining. As you can see, the left side one is gram-positive bacteria. The right side one is gram-negative bacteria. Then what causes the difference? The difference actually layout is a structure which is called a peptidoglycan. Peptidoglycan, here you see actually a few layers of peptidoglycan. And also for gram-negative bacteria, there's just a very thin layers of peptidoglycan. What are peptidoglycan? Peptidoglycan actually is a polymer consisting of the sugars, polysaccharides, and amino acids. It actually protects the bacteria to maintain the integrity of the cell membrane and cell wall. For the difference between gram-positive bacteria and gram-negative bacteria is the thickness of the peptidoglycan. So that's how we distinguish them. And normally for gram-positive bacteria, they are actually sphere like a ball. And for gram-negative bacteria, they kind of like a rod shape. So that's because actually the elasticity, how robust the peptidoglycan can hold the bacteria. That's why, because a very thick layer for gram-positive bacteria, so the bacteria usually present like a ball sphere shape. And for virus, actually, it's pretty simple. As we said, the size about actually anywhere from 10, 17 nanometers to 3 micro nanometers in diameter. And for the basic shape, it also has two different shapes. One is rod-like. The other one is a sphere, like a ball. And for any virus, they have a protective shell, which is called a capsid. Capsid actually, they are consisting of identical protein subunits. No matter what kind of virus they are, they share the same protein subunits. And this actually capsid accounts for about 50% of virus weight. Then we distinguish, just like we distinguish bacteria, we have gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria. And when we distinguish virus, actually, we use enveloped or non-enveloped virus. That's what we use. So what's the difference here? Let's take a look at those two pictures. On the left side, this is non-enveloped virus. So inside, we have the DNA or RNA information, and then covered by the protective shell, which is capsid. And then this is non-enveloped virus. If this is enveloped virus, so outside of the capsid protective shell, we have actually bilayer structure. This bilayer structure actually just like a human mammalian cells. So this is kind of like an envelope. So we call this is enveloped virus. This is non-enveloped virus. So which kind of virus? They are enveloped virus. We have Ebola, measles virus, and the influenza. They all belong to the enveloped virus. And we have the norovirus. They belong to the non-enveloped virus. So that's actually a structural difference. And on the actually virus surface, you can see different color and different structures. That actually makes a difference of the virus because they actually call the ligand. The ligand to help the virus to latch on the mammalian cells to start to launch the infections. We will talk about it in that slide. In terms of the resistance, because they cause infections, right? So we actually want to find a way to prevent infections. We want to find a way to kill them, to disinfect those pathogens. So in terms of the resistance, actually, that's actually well-known structure hierarchy of the different resistance. The top one would be actually the protein prions. We talk about it, and then followed by the actually the endospores of bacteria, like for example bacillus or C. diff. Then followed by microbacteria. Microbacteria actually can cause TB, tuberculosis. And then followed by actually some parasites, and then bacteria, and then fungi, then virus without envelope. So virus without envelope actually they're more resistant. Virus with envelope. So this is a general rule when we're talking about different resistance for the different pathogens. This actually all linked with the other structures. We talk about a peptidoglycan. We talk about the membrane or envelope or non-enveloped virus. These actually are fundamental reasons cause why they have different resistance. Then for the pathogens, as we can see, right, they're very small, anywhere ranging from 10 nanometers to about 10 micrometers, which actually beyond our ability to see them under the naked eyes. So how can we tell them, for example, if an infection happens, right? We want to actually trace down which one is a culprit, then how we do that one. So we'll just briefly talk about the basic and the clinical microbiology. So traditional way, we talk about, we have the gram staining or the acid fast staining, the way to tell roughly what kind of category bacteria or pathogens we're talking about. And then another way actually we have actually the culture way. Culture way is we use different medium and utilize the difference between among of different bacteria. They have different enzymes. They have different biological way to utilize nutrition. Then we use a different culture medium and then linked with different dye. So when the different bacteria, they grow on the nutrition agar, they will actually present different colors. So from the morphology, from the color of the colonies, we can tell what kind of bacteria that is. But it takes lots of different reactions to trace back which bacteria that is. And also we have actually immunology assay, basically that actually utilize some immunology reactions presented on the ligand or receptors on the cell membrane to tell what kind of pathogen that is. And all the culture, I have to point out, the culture method only can be used for the fungi or for bacteria. For virus, actually, that's pretty hard because we have to use a cell line that's much more complicated. This slide basically is a summary, actually, overview of all the different microbial diagnostic methods. So on the left side, which actually is a single E. coli image, which is taken by atomic force microscope, which actually give today actually they give the highest resolution to a E. coli. As you can see, here is E. coli, and then you can see actually the structure here we call actually flagella or fimbriae. Actually, they're different. Here you see actually a fimbriae structure, which also called pili. They function as kind of hands for the bacteria to help them to grasp on the epithelial cells to launch infections. So atomic force microscope give really high resolution. That's why we can see this. And in order to actually diagnose this E. coli, we have different ways. The traditional way would be actually do the culture method as we mentioned on the previous slide. And another way actually we can use a fluorescence diagnosis. Basically, we actually put some dye which is specifically binding to certain structures on the bacteria so they can show different colors. So this is actually live delicate. The red color means a dead bacteria. The green means the live one. And then we have actually can do the biochemical diagnosis by utilize different actually enzymes, metabolism pathway, so to differentiate different bacteria. Or we utilize the surface antigen or the surface ligand receptor difference and binding to specific assay. This is called immunological diagnosis. All these methods has been used widely, in clinical settings. And then the recent decades, 2 decades ago, actually, we started to use another method, actually switch to the molecular diagnosis, which including the PCR. You probably heard about PCR multiple times, which is actually polymerase chain reactions. What is that? That is actually, if you have a small fraction of the DNA or RNA, we can use we have an amplification mechanism we can use, which actually uses this enzyme to help. And with a primer, we can duplicate this very, very small amount of DNA or RNA piece information into a lot of DNA or RNA pieces. And by that one, then we can amplify the signal by running a gel. And because they have different lengths, which means different molecular weight, so they will have different resistance time. They can form different bands, at a different, height. Then we can tell what kinds of bacteria that is. For example, this is E. coli, this is Staphylococcus epidermidis. So this is a way. And the new technology is pretty exciting nowadays. We actually have the true molecular diagnosis, which is a surface-based hybridization. You probably heard about the gene chip. This is actually a gene chip. And the next slide, actually, we can see clearly the gene chip. What is that? That is actually we immobilize a single strand DNA or RNA or any synthetic probe on a substrate because all the DNA, RNA, they hybridize in a very unique way. One can find the exact match to hybridize to form a double strand DNA or RNA hybridization. And by doing that one, we actually can use a probe to fish out what kind of pathogen that is. Of course, we have to do the lysis of the pathogen to let them release the genetic information to form the hybridization. As you can see, they actually link with different fluorescent tag. They can show in different color. By looking at this, hybridization gene chip, we can trace back what kind of pathogen that is. This is fairly fast, because for the culture-based method, it takes up to 72 or even 96 hours to tell what kind of pathogen that is. But for the molecular diagnosis, for example, the DNA hybridization, it only takes actually a few hours to tell the results. So it's pretty exciting for the microbiology technology. Then let's switch gear to the infections. For infections, actually, that's 3 key elements. The three key elements, the first one, of course, would be the source of the pathogens. The second one is the host, which is a human being. And the most important, actually, is the means of the transmission. So what is actually the transmission pathway to bridge to introduce the pathogens into the host? So this is actually the three key elements when we're talking about any infections. Then for some terminology, here is pathogenicity. Pathogenicity actually is ability of a microorganism to cause disease by overcoming the defense system of a host. And the virulence is a degree of the pathogenicity. In the school settings, very common school settings, we actually can, we have the opportunity to expose to all the different transmission pathways, which including the direct contact, which means a physical contact, skin to skin, and also includes the indirect contact, which is a transmission by the formaldehyde. For example, a sick student, touch the table, and then let on another student come here and touch the contaminated table. They probably will get actually infected again too. And also we have the droplet transmission by cough or sneeze, or by the vehicle transmission, which is water, food, or air. The pathogen must gain the access actually to the host, which is a few steps. The first step is adhere to the host tissues. Then the second step is penetrate or invade the host defense system. The third step is multiply and then release to cause more infection, to spread the infection. When we talk about the port of entry, there's actually three common port of entries. The first one is mucous membrane. The second one is skin. The third one is parental route. So that's in school settings, actually, there's only number one and number two most common being thing. The third one, mainly actually, you have the needle injections that will be in the hospital settings. So we want to talk about that one. Let's look at the mucous membrane. For the mucous membrane, we have actually the different routes. The first one is respiratory tract. Respiratory tract actually would be the easiest and most frequent route of infections. People can inhale through nose or oral cavity, and many infectious disease, for example, the common cold, pneumonia, tuberculosis, influenza, smallpox, and measles, they're actually transmitted by the respiratory tract. And the second most common one is the GI tract. GI tract actually is causing infections by taking food, contaminated food or water, or even actually putting the fingers into our mouth. We can have the GI tract infections. Most of them actually the pathogens will be inactivated by the stomach acid or the enzyme in the stomach, but some pathogens they may survive, so they can further invade the small intestine, cause infections. Some of them like norovirus, salmonella, hepatitis A. Another one actually is general urinary tract. Urinary tract actually mainly caused by sexual transmitted disease. This actually also will happen for the mucous membrane. For the skin, unbroken skin actually is a very good barrier to microorganisms. So normally they actually infections cannot happen on the unbroken skin. However, when the skin got broken, actually, for example, there's a bite or wounds, it's basically open it up. So the mucous membrane will directly be exposed to the opportunistic pathogens, potentially cause infections. And that's actually, we have to bear in mind, there's a preferred portal of entries. What does that mean? That means actually for pathogens, they actually have to enter through the preferred routes to cause infections. Let's look at some examples. For example, for strep. For strep, actually, if we inhale, it will cause pneumonia. It's pretty severe sometimes. However, if we accidentally get into our stomach, into the GI tract, it will cause no infections. Why? Because certain ligands on the strep, they only can bind into the receptors in our lung cells. So that's why in the GI tract, we don't have any receptors to let on That's why there's no infection can happen. And for Salmonella, that's actually the opposite way. Salmonella only can cause the GI tract infections. If the Salmonella, for example, on our skin, we actually have no worries about it, because if that's unbroken skin, we will not get infections from the Salmonella. Again, because there's no receptors for Salmonella to latch on human skin. They have to go to the GI tract. However, for some microbes, they actually can enter the human body, cause infections through different routes of entries. For example, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, it can cause many problems in our eyes, skin, or stomach. We talk about the different transmission modes. How, for example, the direct transmission, indirect transmission. So does that mean, like for example, measles we talked about, right? Measles actually cause the respiratory infections, so transmitted by the respiratory system. So does that mean actually the measles cannot be transmitted by other methods? Not really. Actually, other methods can be used as a bridge. For example, let's look at this, the recent outbreak of the measles. Measles, they're very, it's highly contagious virus living in the nose and throat mucus of an infected person. It usually actually spreads to others through coughing and sneezing. However, measles virus, they actually can live for up to 2 hours on a surface. So what does that mean? That means if other people breathe the contaminated air or touch the infected surfaces, right, and then use the finger touch our eyes, nose, and mouth, they will have the direct contact with the mucous membrane. They also can cause infections. So this means actually the environmental surfaces, they can serve as a vehicle to bridge different transmission routes. Tomorrow we'll look at more detailed case studies to talking about the bridge of the infectious transmission mode. So is actually is direct transmission to the respiratory system. However, the environmental surfaces, they can play a big role, crucial role to bridge the transmission modes to make measles from a contaminated surface to human body cause infections. We talk about a lot about the attachment, adhesion. This here, I want to go to a very fundamental one. So we'll just go, high-level overview. Just want to give you some, overview idea about the microbiology, how they cause infection. The first step is adhesion and attachment. Let's look at actually influenza. For influenza, it's pretty simple virus, which is enveloped virus. And on the structure, we have an envelope here. And on the other side, you can see many different structures, right? So let's just look at 2 different structures. The first one is hemagglutinin. Hemagglutinin actually is a structure here which helps the influenza virus to attach on the epithelial cells to launch infections. And there's another structure called neuraminidase. Neuraminidase is not a protein. What's the function? The function is to release the influenza from the attached epithelial cells to cause more infections, to spread the influenza virus to the environment. And for the hemagglutinin, the structure here, there's 18 subtypes. For another one, neuraminidase, there's 11 subtypes. So that's why we hear about lots of different influenza strains. So what does those strain variation come from? They're actually coming from the combination from these 2. So 18 times 11, that will give us 198. So basically, that's totally 198 different subunits of influenza. That's why every year when we get the flu vaccine, we always have to, get a vaccine every year, because the virus may come up, differently every year because they continuously mutate. And for the flu vaccine, we only include about 3 to 4 different strains. We make our best guess to see, which, this year what kind of mutation they may come up. So we make our best guess. Usually we get about 60 to 70%, success on the vaccine effectiveness. and totally 128. So here you can appreciate the differentiation of the tiny structure on the virus can cause lots of actually infectious vaccine prevention difficulties. This is for virus, and also for bacteria, they have a similar structure as we mentioned the P. fimbriae for E. coli. So then cause some common infections and pathogens in schools as we understand the basics of the pathogens and understand the pathogenesis and understand the transmission mode and understand the attachment, then we can see all those pathogens, they can cause infections at different organs. For example, stomach, intestine infections. This many can caused by both bacteria and the virus. And we can have the lung and respiratory infections. For example, cold and flu would be the most common one, and still we actually have the measles virus. And the skin infections and rashes would be the staphylococcus or strep. And eye infections can caused by virus and bacteria. For example, staphylococcus and pseudomonas. For example, pseudomonas, we understand that it has multiple infection routes, which means it can infect eyes, skin, or lung, or stomach. So it can cause lots of problems. And also, for the ear infections can caused by virus and also bacteria. So as you can see here, even we can see very similar symptoms sometimes. For example, the skin rash. The skin rash actually could be caused by a strep, but also the skin rash could be a symptom of the measles infection. So for the symptoms, usually that's actually our immune system reaction, inflammation. So it does not tell us what kind of infection it is, but we have to actually be vigilant to keep eyes on the student to catch the early sign of those infections and to trace them. Even that, when we try our best, but for many infectious disease, for example, measles or influenza, even days, couple of days before the symptoms appear, they are contagious. So this is, the battle we have to face. This slide always show this slide to many presentations and many conferences. So what is this slide? This slide actually, this one tell us the x-axis is the year. I group 4 years into one time window from back to 32 years ago till 2011, and the y-axis is the number of new antibiotics approved by FDA. As you can see, back to 30 years ago, it's pretty linear. However, it's linear declining. So every 4 years, we have less new antibiotics coming to the market. And you probably heard about the bacterial resistance, the superbug. So this is really, we're not actually in good situation. With the increasing superbug and with the decreasing choice of new antibiotics, the infectious disease will become more and more actually public health threat, also for the school system and for the medical system. That's why for this slide, always try to raise the awareness of the correct use of antibiotics, and also try to raise awareness of the importance of prevention. Because if we can prevent the infection at the first place, we can avoid, there's no antibiotics we can use to treat the infections. And for the infectious disease, as we can see, so as a summarize, actually here is, because the special settings of the school system pretty crowded, a group setting, people are in, very close contact with each other. They share supplies and equipment, so the infections, the transmission can happen actually more frequently than many different other settings. In order to cut the transmission pathways, because we have no control for, the host and sometimes the source of the pathogen, so we only can control the third element of the infection chain, which is a transmission pathway. What we're trying to do is, we're trying to encourage the sick students and the staff stay at home and seek medical attention And also we try to promote the good hand hygiene and the surface disinfection, environmental disinfection, and being vigilant about cleaning disinfection materials, and also try to catch the early sign of infections to have the students seek the medical attention. And today, so as a summarize, today we overview the infectious disease. At the schools, we can see the fairly significant numbers, at the infectious disease at the schools. And then we spend, lots of time talking about the fundamentals of the infectious disease, mainly three aspects: the basic clinical microbiology, pathogenesis, and the common pathogens, and especially their transmission pathways. And tomorrow we're going to focus on the case study. So with that being said, thank you very much, and I'll be very happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Yitao. That was a great presentation. We do have a couple of questions already submitted, and if there's anyone else out there that would like to ask a question, please type them into the questions box and go to webinar, and we can address them for you. The first one isn't as much of a question, but just a point by one of our attendees, was that she agreed that parenteral route of transmission in school is rare, but potentially students could act out against a peer using lancets to break the skin barrier in fellow students, or so she just wanted to make that point, which I thought was a good point.
Yeah.
And then we have a question from Lolita, and she wants to know your professional opinion on Morgellons, Morgellons disease. If you are aware if there are any documented cases with school age or high school students. Is that something that you're familiar with?
Not quite familiar with, but I can actually look for some information and follow up with you by emails, if that will be
Sure.
good with you. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. So you'll do a little research, and we will follow up by email. That sounds great. Here's another question. The CDC released information about, and I will probably mispronounce this, so I apologize. It looks like Clostridium difficile.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Sorry. In the community, can you speak about the risks of C. diff? Okay, so I've heard C. diff in the school setting.
Okay, that's a great question. Actually, C. diff definitely the infection rate is going up, especially for the medical settings. For example, 10 years ago, for the hospitals, the infection rate for C. diff is only about 4.25%, and then nowadays it's about 8.5%. So within 10 years, almost doubled the infection rate. And also some community, for example, the nursing homes, C. diff is also a big problem. But for the school settings, to my best knowledge, attending different meetings, and I haven't heard actually C. diff infection is a big issue for the school system yet. There's actually a couple of reasons. The main reason actually is we'll talk about the transmission pathway. C. diff actually many parts, the transmission pathway is a GI tract, or the blood-borne, but mainly the GI tract. And for the school system, unless you have the source of C. diff, because for the hospital settings we have the C. diff patients, so they can continuously spread the C. diff to the environment. But for the school system, usually the C. diff risk is relatively much smaller. And another thing I want to remind you is the symptoms of C. diff infection sometimes is very similar to some we call, for example, stomach flu or norovirus infections or salmonella caused the small intestine infections. They're very similar. You get abdominal pain, you get the diarrhea. So we sometimes will have to differentiate that's real C. diff infection or caused by other pathogens.
Great, thank you. Another question that came through is about eye, foot, and hand disease, or what causes it? Is that maybe hand, foot, and mouth?
Yeah, so if you go actually to my slide, go to the eye infections. Eye infections actually can caused by many different pathogens, and they're showing very similar symptoms. Many of the eye infections, actually, I would watch out, actually, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which is a bacteria, which is the most common culprit cause of infection.
Okay. In light of the recent measles outbreak, would you recommend that staff measles immunization status be recorded? And if lacking evidence, should they be required to have to be immunized?
Absolutely, I totally agree. Actually, the measles outbreak is just, cross the street to our company at the Disneyland in California. In the United States, our infection, the measles vaccine rate is only actually 91%. So put it into perspective, into the world, we're actually ranked 134, number 134, which means that 133 countries ahead of us. So I think, measles vaccine is pretty effective. If you just get one shot of measles vaccine, the effectiveness rate is about 94%. And if you get 2 shots, actually the rate, prevention rates, infectious rates will go up to 97% rate. So I don't see a reason why we shouldn't get the measles vaccine. And the vaccine has been clinically proved very effective and has very minimal side effects. So personal opinion, definitely, I think, we should make it mandatory.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a question about H. pylori, P-Y-L-O-R-I, at school. One of our attendees has had 3 kids on meds for this year. Is that something you're familiar with?
Yeah, the H. pylori. The H. pylori actually, it's called ulcer actually in the stomach. Actually, this won the Nobel Prize in 26. And for H. pylori infections, which is caused by ulcer before, people think, okay, stomach ulcer is not caused by bacteria, but this scientist actually, he drinks H. pylori, and then he has actually developed the symptom, and he won the Nobel Prize. That's a little story. To prevent this infection, so there's several things we should watch out. The first thing is, we should be, take the general, which we call the universal precaution, which is good hand hygiene and good food hygiene, and also the environmental hygiene, because all the 3 can help the transmission of H. pylori into the GI tract.
Great. And then a couple questions came through about MRSA. What about MRSA infections in school? And in students who have MRSA and they're already on antibiotics, is it okay for them to participate in sports if their site is covered and they're maybe changing in a separate room from the other students? What is your professional view?
I'm glad that answer the question. Actually, tomorrow on my presentation, I will have a case study talking about MRSA. So we'll have very detailed overview on that one. So briefly answer the question is, MRSA actually can be spread, from people to people. So I would suggest that, to be careful with MRSA positive, students, to watch out to do a certain separation for the sports activities. That's my personal opinion on that.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's see here. We did have a couple questions about, for example, is a product like Lysol effective? And then there was another question about non-antibacterial liquid soap versus antibacterial liquid soap. So maybe you can kind of address both of those.
Yeah, so for the product-wise, actually, you want to look out for the EPA registration, because EPA has a very rigorous, testing. So once the product has an EPA registration, which means in the first layer it passes the EPA rigorous testing, give you a peace of mind. The second thing you want to watch out is the fine print on the instructions. For example, the contact time. This is often we overlook, because most of products, for the products on the market, they're about a 10 minutes contact time. What does that mean? That means you actually have to apply and wait for 10 minutes. However, for other products, actually, when you wipe them, the surface is very hard to maintain the wetness for 10 minutes. So which often results failure of disinfection, give you a false sense of protection. So that's what I'm saying you want to watch out. And for the antimicrobial soap, you probably noticed actually in 2 years, about 1.5 years ago, actually FDA issued a letter caused some false claim on the consumer market about the antimicrobial soap because the lack of efficacy. So my personal opinion actually is for the hand hygiene, I would recommend that if you use a soap, any soap would be actually good to use as long as you have the running water because the mechanical shear force will be strong enough to get rid of the pathogens from your hands. Not necessarily you have to kill the pathogens. As long as you can get rid of the pathogens from your hands, actually you're free of transmission and the infectious risk. And if at the absence of the lack of running water, I would suggest you use alcohol-based, the rubbing alcohol. So you can use a rubbing alcohol to clean your hands, but keep that in mind. You cannot continuously use a rubbing alcohol for many times. Usually, scientifically speaking, after using that for 6 times, you actually have the residue building up on your hands. So you have to go to the running water to rinse off the residues. Otherwise, the efficacy will be compromised.
Wonderful answer. Thank you. And I think we addressed this a little bit with the measles questions, but specifically for school nurses, what's a good way to respond to parents who choose not to immunize their children and the herd immunity philosophy?
It is really tough because if a child is not immunized by the measles vaccine, and if other students also do not have the actually immunization, the success of infectious rates is about 90%, which means 90% chance other students will get infected by the measles. So that's why the vaccine is so important. If we cannot know that one, so I would suggest to do two layers. The first one is universal, prevention, which means actually you do all the hand hygiene, you do the surface disinfection, and then the second layer is you watch out the students carefully. You can catch out the early sign of the measles infection. The good thing is, the measles infection, they can be cured if you catch the sign early enough.
Thank you. Well, I think we covered everyone's questions. If anyone else wanted to submit anything else, now would be the time. We have maybe time for one more question. And in the meantime, I will start wrapping things up for today. We wanted to let everyone know that we wanted to really appreciate that you attended our conference today, our seminar. And we do have a special offer if you are interested in trying some new products at your school or maybe restocking your cabinets for the rest of the school year. If you buy 3 canisters of the Cava Wipes 1, you can get a free box of Vionex towelettes for free. Just use the code METRICS1 at checkout, and I'll include all of this information in the follow-up email for you, so you don't have to write all of this down, but just so that you are aware. And you can take advantage of that on our website at schoolhealth.com. And I would like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. I would like to thank our presenter, Yatao Liu. It was a great presentation. Thank you so much. Be sure to join us tomorrow for part 2, the importance of surface hygiene, and we will be getting together at the same time as today, 3 p.m. Central. Watch your inbox for the follow-up email from us. That will come in about 5 days. We are going to compile all of the great resources, the slides, your certificate of attendance, the webinar recordings, the special offer. We're going to put that all together in an email from you, and you'll get that from us in about 5 business days, so keep an eye out for that. And if you can, please take a moment at the end of this webinar to take a really brief survey. It's about 5 questions, really quick, to help us improve or to let us know that we did a good job. When I close out the session, the survey will automatically pop up. You can just select your answers and click Submit. That will end today's broadcast. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We hope to see you tomorrow.